modern city in the northeastern United States, a turbulent and tense environment of political life. Among towering buildings and noisy streets, where every move matters, Ilhan Omar was steadfast in her determination to change the existing order. With every step she took, it became clear that her role in American politics would not only mark her time, but also become a symbol of the fight against old stereotypes and prejudices. Like many other politicians, Ilhan was accused of unpredictable and even controversial statements that often sparked heated debates. Her criticism of certain political practices and strategies was so radical at times that it attracted the attention of both supporters and fierce opponents. This time, her speech in Congress enraged many. Ilhan addressed her colleagues, discussing the issues of repression and human rights in the U.S., raising the topic of how certain political forces continuously infringe upon the rights of ethnic minorities and persecute migrants. The speech was emotional and loud, but it did not leave senior colleagues indifferent, including John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States. Openly criticizing Ilhan, Roberts accused her of using rhetoric that, while bold, contributed to division in a country already facing numerous social problems. His words were sharp as he declared, "We cannot allow such influence on the youth of this country, as it may lead to chaos." These words from John Roberts became a public statement that ignited political discussions like wildfire. Left-wing activists immediately accused him of threatening freedom of speech, while right-wing supporters backed his words, considering them an essential safeguard against political ideas that endangered the traditional social order. Ilhan felt that this attack was not just political, but also personal. She was not ready to back down. As always, she chose the path of dialogue. She sent John Roberts a request for a personal meeting to share her perspective on the situation and possibly find a compromise. But for John Roberts, this was a new test. During their meeting in Roberts' office at the Supreme Court building, the atmosphere was tense. Ilhan sat across from him, serious and composed, her gaze fixed on Roberts. "You said that my rhetoric could lead to chaos. I want to understand why you think that, and whether there is a possibility for dialogue to look at the situation from another perspective," Ilhan asked, her voice steady, but carrying a deep sense of curiosity. Roberts sighed heavily and looked at her over his glasses, his gaze slowing as he considered his response. "Your words may be too radical for this moment. I understand that you are trying to highlight an important issue, but the methods you use, in my opinion, break down dialogue instead of fostering it," he replied with notable skepticism. Ilhan did not back down. "I understand your concerns, but don't you see that silence only amplifies the problem? Shouldn't we speak about what is truly happening to our people, even if it is difficult to hear?" she asked, her words calm yet filled with conviction. Roberts fell silent. His gaze was thoughtful. He could dismiss this meeting as another attempt to manipulate his opinion, but something in her words struck a chord within him. "Maybe I was too blunt, but this process will take more time than just making statements on air," he finally responded after a pause, his voice softer but no less resolute. Ilhan nodded. She knew that this moment was just the beginning of a long journey that lay ahead. But it was through dialogue, openness, and mutual understanding that even the most rigid positions could be challenged. This meeting did not end in victory or defeat for either side, but it opened new possibilities for progress. Ilhan understood that what mattered was not just winning a single battle, but the ability to be heard, even in the most difficult situations. They parted ways, but an unfinished conversation lingered in the air about the country, about its people, and about the courage it takes to listen to one another. This dialogue, despite its complexity, marked a new stage in the U.S. political landscape, one that would soon unfold into a new wave of debates and reforms. Ilhan knew that every step on this path could change a lot, even if it all began with one crucial conversation. Ilhan Omar sat at her desk in her office, proudly reflecting on her latest political achievements. She was known for her openness to discussion and her commitment to upholding equality and justice in every decision she made. But this time, her peaceful atmosphere was disrupted by news that spread rapidly across the country. Chief Justice John Roberts, the very one who led the Supreme Court, had made a statement that shocked not only her but most politicians. He had publicly condemned her for her remarks on foreign policy and national security. His words carried an air of suspicion and intolerance. It seemed as if she had become the target of a political attack. His high-ranking position lent weight to his words, and for many, she was already guilty, without even having the right to a fair trial. Ilhan felt her heart race. She wasn't used to this kind of pressure. Her aides whispered in the corner, and one of them asked, "What are we going to do?" Ilhan looked out the window at the cityscape, which now seemed so unfamiliar. She couldn't afford to give up. That same evening, she met with close allies to discuss the next steps. The discussion was intense, with each person trying to propose a strategy that would demonstrate her innocence and determination. "You need to address the public immediately, Ilhan," said her longtime colleague, Susan. "People need to hear your truth before others start speaking for you." Ilhan nodded, but her face remained calm, even though she was boiling inside. She knew she couldn't just ignore the situation this time. Now she was being called not just a political opponent, but an enemy of a nation. And that enraged her. But as always, Ilhan wasn't one for direct confrontation. She understood that the key to victory wasn't always aggression, but the ability to listen and comprehend. She wanted to respond to Roberts not only on a legal level, but also on a human level. "Let's prepare my statement, but this time not just as a politician. I need to show that I am more than just an opponent or a judge. I am a representative of my people," she said confidently. The next morning, as Ilhan stood before the camera with a microphone, she faced a difficult moment. She could have reacted to the accusations aggressively, but instead, she paused to ensure each word was carefully chosen. She began to speak. "My fellow Americans, I understand that today I am being accused of things that are not true. But I ask you to look at my actions, at what I am trying to do, rather than at words that have been distorted. As someone who has faced many prejudices, I know how important it is to remain calm in the most difficult times." Her words resonated deeply, and even in the studio, there was a stunned silence. She continued, compelling each listener to reflect on the importance of unity and understanding. "We all have the right to our own opinions," she added, "but that right does not mean that someone should be stripped of their dignity. That's why I invite an open dialogue. If you, John, are ready for this, let's talk without aggression, without emotions." Ilhan's speech was calm, yet her words carried a strength that was both intimidating and captivating. Meanwhile, Roberts did not ignore her statement. His response was swift and sharp, and he had no intention of letting the situation slide. "I believe we can all agree that a public figure cannot allow themselves such behavior," he said publicly at a briefing. "She has no right to question the authority of the judiciary. This undermines trust in the legal system." Word by word, their conflict grew more intense. Ilhan did not back down. She knew that the judicial branch in the U.S. held great power, but her mission was to show that there were other ways to achieve mutual understanding. And so came the next step. Ilhan invited Roberts to a meeting, hoping that through a personal conversation, they could find common ground. Time passed, and their struggle, though filled with emotion, was turning into something more than just political disagreements. Ilhan became increasingly convinced that these challenges could lead to deeper changes if viewed from a different perspective. "This isn't just about me," she thought. "This is about the future we are building for all of us." The next step was crucial. What would happen next? Would Ilhan be able to maintain her composure and keep the dialogue open, or would her confrontation with Roberts lead to significant political shifts? The day of the meeting between Ilhan Omar and John Roberts was approaching, and the entire country eagerly awaited what would come of it. Just a few days ago, their dispute had escalated from political to personal. Ilhan realized that the cost of her struggle had become much higher than she had initially anticipated. All her aides were worried that this might turn into yet another public defeat for her. But Ilhan was different. She had no intention of backing down. She gathered her allies for a final discussion before the meeting. The tension in the room was palpable, but everyone understood that the actions taken at this moment would determine much. "This is not just a fight for the truth, it's a fight for dignity," she said, rising from the table, her eyes burning with determination. "If I step back now, I will lose everything I've worked for." Her colleagues supported her, but there was a moment when one of her aides voiced his doubts. "Ilhan, Roberts is not just a judge. He has influence over the entire system. His words carry weight not only in the courtroom, but also on the streets of this country. If we engage in confrontation, it could end in disaster." She nodded, but a sense of confidence appeared in her gaze. She felt that this time, her heart was guiding her in the right direction. Meanwhile, John Roberts was not sitting idly by. He was just as determined, if not more so. His public statements had grown sharper. He accused Ilhan of undermining the very foundations of American democracy. His words echoed through every news outlet, and he was convinced that the majority of citizens supported him. This was a battle not only for political power, but also for public trust. The meeting between them took place in one of the country's highest courts. The setting was official, but the air in the room was thick with tension. Ilhan stepped forward to meet Roberts, and even his stern gaze failed to break her composure. She was ready. "I appreciate this opportunity to speak," she said with cold confidence, looking him straight in the eye. "I understand that many see my words and actions as hostile or even dangerous, but I have always believed that everyone has the right to express their opinion." Roberts responded sharply, not hiding his irritation. "Your statements are not just offensive. They erode trust in the system that forms the foundation of our country. You are calling into question everything we have worked to build, and I will not allow that to be threatened." Ilhan did not back down. She was not afraid. She knew this was a defining moment, requiring careful and strategic action. "John, I am not questioning the system. I am questioning the fact that some of its representatives forget about the people they are supposed to serve. You want to talk about trust? Why do you ignore those who do not share the same privileges as you?" At that moment, her words were sharp but true. Robert's face remained stone-like, but he could not respond immediately. Ilhan continued, "I understand that you have enormous influence over this country, and that is precisely why your actions should set an example for others. But if we truly want democracy, we need to listen to each other, and not just in courtrooms." This was now a battle not only of words, but of reputations. The room filled with whispers, journalists and politicians across the country awaited the outcome of this confrontation. Roberts paused again, and in his eyes, it was clear he was searching for weaknesses in her argument. He seemed ready to respond, but Ilhan made an unexpected move. "I am not asking for forgiveness for what I say, but I mean something greater than just a political struggle. I mean the people, and that is what I will defend." Now, her voice carried not just determination, but a direct challenge to his authority. What would he say? Would he be able to keep this debate purely verbal, or would it escalate into a level where real decisions had to be made? Robert's response was calculated. "Do you think you can just change everything, Ilhan? Every word you speak carries consequences. Are you ready to live with them?" And so the real battle began, growing more intense with every passing moment. The preparation for decisive action became critically important for both sides. Now, neither could afford to retreat. Every move, every gesture mattered. Only one of them would walk away victorious. Would Ilhan be able to hold her ground? Would Roberts break her resolve? What would happen next? The moment when Ilhan and Roberts were on the edge, when their argument was just one step away from escalation, had arrived. The tension in the room became palpable, as if the air itself had turned crystal heavy. A few seconds of silence, and everyone present understood that these next words would determine not just a political career, but the fate of many people. You think your truth is the only one that matters? Roberts didn't take his eyes off Ilhan. His words were sharp as arrows. My truth is the truth of the law. And we cannot afford to be naive, ignoring reality. Otherwise, our entire system will collapse. Ilhan took a deep breath. She felt adrenaline coursing through her veins, but refused to let emotions take control. Reality, John, she replied, is not just the law. It's also how that law affects people. You can't measure reality with dry numbers and legal codes. Because to me, reality is every person fighting for their place in this world. And if we allow people like you to decide what is right, we will simply turn a blind eye to everything else. Her voice was firm, but her movements, her gaze, became more confident. She knew that everything depended on her response now. You just want to create chaos, Roberts countered, his voice growing louder. This isn't about justice anymore. It's about your ambitions. And I will stand guard over order, no matter how hard you try to undermine it. This moment could not be ignored. The confrontation had grown into something more. This was no longer just a political debate. It was a battle over who had the right to set the rules of the game. And before the nation's eyes, it became clear that this fight was not only about power, but about the very soul of the country. Realizing that his position was now under threat, Roberts decided to go on the offensive. He unfolded a sheet filled with numbers and documents meant to reinforce his stance, to expose Ilhan, but she was ready. These are just words, John, she responded coldly. Numbers don't stop people. People only stop when they are denied a chance, when they are silenced. Ilhan raised her hand, gesturing toward the audience, toward the entire world watching this confrontation. She wasn't just talking about laws. She was talking about people, and that was her greatest weapon. The pressure in the hall was growing, and the voices of journalists outside were rising. The questions weren't getting any easier. And the more people listened, the more they realized these rivals, wouldn't stop until they achieved their goals. Roberts lifted his gaze again, his eyes burning with anger. You forget one thing, Ilhan, he said, stepping closer to her table. My goal is not just to win this battle. My goal is to protect what allows this country to thrive. And I won't let you or anyone else jeopardize that. Ilhan knew this was the moment. She endured his aggression, not stepping back an inch. And her response was a challenge. If thriving to you means continuing something that no longer works, then that's your choice. But I will fight for a different future. A future where every voice matters, even if it isn't heard in a courtroom. Her words were heavier than metal. They weren't just a slogan. They were her promise. This wasn't just a political speech. It was a reflection of who she was. The tension in the hall became unbearable. The journalists were so captivated that they couldn't look away from what was unfolding before them. Just minutes ago, everyone thought this meeting would end in compromise or at least a pause. But now, it was clear, no one was willing to back down. Ilhan couldn't retreat even if she wanted to. This was now a matter of her very existence. Roberts, watching her determination, knew his next move had to be strategically flawless. He understood that to win, he had to do more than persuade. He had to break her. Meanwhile, a deep silence fell over the hall. All eyes were on them. Ilhan and Roberts stood face to face, as if years of history weighed upon their every word, and this battle was only beginning. Both of them knew that their future hinged on this moment, and there was no turning back. Roberts took a step back, but he did not avert his gaze from Ilhan. He felt his blood boiling with the desire to win, yet at the same time, a shadow of uncertainty pierced his heart. He knew he couldn't win this battle with arguments alone. Ilhan was strong, her stare was unyielding, and she was not afraid to take risks. Ilhan noticed his confidence beginning to waver. She knew this was her moment. "John," she said, her voice calm, yet every word struck like a bullet. "You don't win by breaking me. You win when you learn to listen, not just dictate." Robert stood in silence, as if realizing the weight of her words. But he was not ready to retreat. His time had come, and he decided, if not now, then when? He gathered himself and replied, as if determined to take everything in one move. "You're trying to play with emotions, Ilhan. But I won't let you manipulate people. This world won't change because of one speech or one law. It will change only when we maintain control." But there was something in his words that sounded more like an attempt to convince himself. Ilhan, noticing this, realized that the game of politics was taking on an entirely different meaning. She was not just part of the system. She was the one who could change it. Meanwhile, the camera capturing everything zoomed in on their faces, recording every shift in their expressions, every subtle change in their voices. This moment was not just political theater, it was history in the making, a scene that would be remembered long after they both left the room. Ilhan took the final step forward. "If you truly believe that control is the only thing worth fighting for," her gaze became even more resolute, "then I cannot be part of this game. Because for me, John, real power is not in control. It's in freedom, in allowing people to decide their own future." And then she walked away, step by step, calmly, without hesitation. Roberts couldn't believe what had just happened. He searched for words, but found none. The entire room froze. Every journalist, every politician, every person present was captivated by the weight of what had just transpired. Even after she left, the tension remained in the air, heavy and unshaken. Time seemed to stand still. Roberts remained standing in place. He understood that the battle was far from over, that their paths had not truly diverged. Their conflict was only beginning to take on new dimensions. But something in his eyes had already changed. Outside, Ilhan stepped into the crowd waiting for her. They did not see her victory as a grand triumph. It was not a victory over Roberts. It was a victory over her own doubts, over the part of her that could have broken. "This is not the end," she said to her aides standing beside her. "This is only the beginning." And she knew that the road ahead would be even harder, because this was only the first step in a long fight for change. But now she was ready to go all the way for her vision, for the people she had vowed to protect. Her first victory had not come easily, but it had given her something that could never be taken away: faith in herself and in her convictions. Meanwhile, inside the chamber, Robert stared at the empty space where she had just stood. His speeches, his words, no longer carried weight. He realized that winning could not come solely through controlling the situation. One thought remained in his mind: how do you stop someone who is willing to lose everything for their ideals? Ilhan could have backed down, could have broken, but she didn't. And that was her true strength.